Back around 1992, I was a high school sophomore, and unlike most of my friends, I didn't work the typical high school jobs like McDonald's, Taco Bell, some retail job in the mall, or work at the local grocery store. I was very good with my hands and worked jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. All of my contacts I worked for under the table, as I started working on some of these jobs as young as 14. It was beneficial for both of us, as I was only called in when needed, and I was the only guy willing to work evenings and weekends. One of my contacts worked doing remodeling projects like at restaurants, bars, retail shops, and typical commercial projects that we could only work on after hours. Like I said, that worked out for both of us because I went to school and would sometimes work after school or weekends. For this one contact, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. I did this while the other crew was doing the installation or remodeling work. I was the kid, but had their respect because I did what I was supposed to do and did the work of a man without complaints. I got paid good, and in one night, I could make more than my friends did working all week at McDonald's. This one instance, I got a call from the guy I worked for, and he said he had a project for me and if I could work the following Saturday. I said, yeah, sure. He said be sure to bring food and lots to drink, as there was nothing nearby. I used to have a small cooler and would fill it with drinks like Cokes, Gatorade, or whatever, plus chips and a couple sandwiches. Back then, I could eat a whole pizza by myself and burn it all off working. He picked me up that Saturday morning as I didn't have a car or license yet, so he would pick me up and drive me to sites for work and leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crew, as they were the more skilled labor guys. I was just a tear-out kid. Here's the part that was my major downfall to this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars. You see, at the time, my goal was to save up enough money to buy an old muscle car and rebuild it. It took a long time to arrive to the site. As we drove up, it was the middle of nowhere. Now, you may not think California has places like this now, but back in the early 1990s out in the Mojave Desert, it was big plots of land and homes more than a few city blocks apart. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other two-lane highways for a long distance. I remember he asked me about my drinks, and he pulled out a brand new jug of water that he had in his truck. Looked like it had been there for a while. He told me to take it with me just in case. He said that the water to the house I would be working at was turned off. As we pull up to the property, he's in a hurry to drop off tools and get to another work site, so I hurry up and help him with things like breaker bars, shovels, pry bar, hammer, broom, several big trash bins, and a small tool bag that I often had with me. He tells me he'll be back to pick me up at about 5 or 6 p.m. as there's no electricity to this site, plus it should only take me till then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying I'm only paying you till this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never too outrageous, and we always had a good understanding on time and task. He drove away, and now I'm at the property all by myself. I walk into the house. It's mostly empty. My job was to remove all remaining furniture, contents, and appliances, remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathrooms, and remove all of the wood paneling. This project was going to be like what we now call a flip. They were going to fix it up and sell it. Almost immediately, I get kind of spooked by the place. It was very odd. Now mind you, I'm used to being on sites alone working all night. This was the daytime on a Saturday and it was bright outside. However, the house was old, dark, musty, kind of cool inside. The kind of cool that gives you goosebumps. To add to the spook factor of the house, let me describe what I remember. Imagine walking back in time to the 1960s or earlier. Dark green carpet that looked like matted down broccoli. Pine wood everywhere that had a dark stain to it. The wood paneling wasn't the kind used in the 1980s sheet paneling, but actual board paneling, tonged and grooved, old window curtains that all looked like someone's grandma made. Avocado green sink, stovetop, oven, and the stuff that was left behind, like old furniture, and a closet full of old stuffed animals that looked to be about 30 years old. The style of this house was like an old western ranch, as there were wagon wheels inside and outside the house. I had an old battery-powered radio, but could only get a few stations, but was just happy for the background noise. I started removing all the junk from the house, and as I normally did on a project, if there wasn't a dumpster on site, I would make a trash pile. I tore up all the flooring next. To my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. I took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart in less than an hour. I ended up using that big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face, but by late noon, as most who know, the desert, the dryness, also starts to take moisture from you, especially if you are working hard in it. So by late afternoon, I'm down to my last drink, and I had already ate everything that I brought. No worries, I thought, the guy should be here in a couple hours to pick me up. As the time gets closer for them to arrive, I'm all done with my task. I even sweep the entire place, and it's now ready for the rehab crew to get to work, making this place look modern. The time of the year I was out here wasn't a typical hot desert day, but as you know in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt on, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. This was the time before cell phones were common, and there was no electricity, water, or phone service to the house. I climbed up to get on top of the roof of the house to get a better look to see if I could see anything in the distance. What looked like miles down, I saw a smaller road that this dirt road led to and a few homes, but those homes were all in the dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask to use their phone. The nearest house, no one was home, and this home also looked abandoned. If you remember, in the early 90s, it was the start of a decline of the economy and a recession, so it wasn't uncommon to see a lot of foreclosed homes in a neighborhood. A lot of those I worked on at that time. I started to think about my options as darkness was fast approaching. 1 was to stay at the house until morning. 2, hike with what little water I had a few miles in the dark Mojave night. Or 3, wait until early morning and hike out of there to some sort of civilization. It had also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except for my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was, and certainly my family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night, but I didn't even tell them I was going to work there. They knew me and how much I would work to save up from my car that they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness was all around me, it was starting to look amazing at the night sky, and lucky for me, the moon was bright. I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire. Even though I tried, I was going to make a small bonfire out of broken up construction debris as the temperature started to fall, probably down to the low 40s. My only option was to go back inside the empty, creepy house that somehow seemed even more creepy sitting alone in the dark. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of little light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and sat in the living room of this house facing the door. I was starting to hear wind, odd noises, which I assume are animals in the distance, and what sounds like leaves cracking under feet. I was starting to shiver from the cold, so I set off on trying to start a fire in the fireplace. At least this is keeping my mind off of the situation. Sitting in this living room next to the fireplace, the house seems even more dark than it should have. Mind you, in the daytime, the inside seemed dark, so with only the moonlight, I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. My mind starts to play tricks on me as I'm seeing shadows moving outside and inside the house. I'm also starting to hear someone talking, like whispers or something. I get up from my chair and I yell out hello. Just as I do, I hear something fall from the other side of the house. I run over to the door and go outside again. At least in the moonlight I can see better, but off in the distance I hear noises and see movement, but can't make it out. I have my pile of tools by the edge of the house, ready for when my boss picks me up, so I run over there and grab Big Daddy, which was a heavy pry bar that I used in demo. I was ready to defend myself for who or what was out there. I have to keep moving because my undershirt and flannel shirt were not enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and for as far as I could see, there were no lights. I didn't want to try to make it up on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, but I get up on top of the gate just to try and gain a little bit of altitude to see if I can see some house lights or nearby car lights. My mind went to the stories that circled around at the time, about how people would come up to the Mojave Desert and bury bodies, how there were Satanist groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. Now I knew no one was in that house, but I swear I would hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch looking in the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. Around 11 p.m., I look at my watch thinking this is going to be a long night, as all this stuff only happened since it just got dark. I don't know how I'm going to make it another 6 hours until daylight. I start thinking the moment the sun rises, I'm going to take the little water I had left and walk east. I knew going east I would eventually make it somewhere. The dirt road I was off of, I knew that direction led to a paved road. Closer to midnight, I'm wide awake. My eyes are fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now a car would come down and maybe they can call for help for me. I remember casually turning to look back into the house, as all this time I keep hearing noises, but telling myself maybe it was a rat or some animal. I see a shadow of a person move from the kitchen to down the hall. I jump up from sitting down and thought to myself, that's a human, not an animal. I start backing my way out of the porch towards the pile and trip over debris and fall down on the ground. I get up but fall again. It was like something pushed me down, or my imagination, but all of a sudden these bright lights are coming closer to me as I'm laying on the ground. I jump up and it's my boss. He's looking at me like, what the heck are you doing? I was just so glad to see him. I wasn't mad or anything. I just asked him what happened. He said he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought that he was coming. So no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening he asked the other crew leader about how far along I got on the job, and that crew leader told him that he didn't get me. Well, it took him almost 2 hours from where they were working to come get me. He felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. He also grabbed a can of Coke from his cooler and asked me if I was thirsty. I drank it all in one gulp. Once we got back towards civilization, he went through a fast food drive-thru and I ate like I never ate before. As he was driving home, I asked him about the house. I told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on it, only what we were supposed to do. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, flashlight, and double the amount of liquid. In 2003, I had met a guy that said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up with was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside my state. I never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that had been happening over the countryside. So my now ex decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see most of the US. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than when it was when I was trucking. People now have advanced technology and the ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had was either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter even existed. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be very creepy. Keeping a bit of anonymity is the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, and me, since I was a 20-year-old kid at the time and from Alaska, ended up being Northern Exposure. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy things. And I do mean a ton of crazy things. People often hear about stories or things that happen on the road, but most of them are more gross than scary. But this was one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Something about this guy made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The radio started to crackle and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough that we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone, so we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it, that voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be similar to how Heath Ledger talks as Joker in The Dark Knight. There was something just off about it, and it gave me the chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete, where you headed?" Purple Pete was the color of our truck. My ex hollered back that we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back, because by that time we would have ran out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure. My ex had became friends with him, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at, told him we would meet up to have a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios would no longer reach. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on and waited. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime, lots of bad stuff happens, so we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited and eventually killed enough time where we could take another load, so we headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, also known as truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. But we chalked it up to drama on the radio. After all, we had quite literally nothing better to do than make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about it and even brought it up to Maniac. He just laughed and said it must be one real sick guy. Had to just be a story, because if it was true, they would have caught him already. I bet he's even left fingerprints at the crime scene. With as bloody and as messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. This all seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so it was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way and we went ours, and after a while we forgot about his weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later, we were in Mississippi, and we hear a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day, and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer and head out bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. So cutting our much needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier and I wasn't speaking with him, and he really hated the silent treatment. Our load was to deliver in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. It was a win-win. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee, and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and I was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6'3" and about 280 pounds, so in theory, we could defend ourselves if we needed to. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in trucks, and if you were caught by Department of Transportation, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. He said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer off and meet us at Flying J, which was a gas station that was down the road from where he was. So we get ready to fuel up and showered and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food. Waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much for noise in this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted to a ton of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in things they're not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops at a truck stop go hand in hand, but this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying J's, so it could probably fit about 80 truck and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. Then you could fit a dozen or so more trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot lizard, even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk in alone. I was walking with my ex. We weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious that I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird he was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers, because that was again another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was, just that it looked kind of menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on so I could see his face. It was a little distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours, but I remember looking back and seeing the red light still illuminating the porthole window on the passenger door, and a small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was still watching us. Even with as warm as it was, chill shut up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling. My gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB radio for our night entertainment to see if we could call Maniac and see what the deal was. The chatter was all about the cops and the ambulances, fire truck, and Department of Transportation. All the commotion was basically across from us but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lot lizard and that it was bad. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we were, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up the scene. When you hear the phrase, "some things cannot be unseen," this was one of them. The lady, or what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer and the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, the piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of the police car, handcuffed, his head hung limp with his forehead on the back of the seat, was crying big heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door, wailing that he had nothing to do with it and praying to God to be forgiven for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left and just decided to pull out of his space while she was attached. She got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was like something you'd probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He looked at me, pale, as if he was going to be sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back, not thinking that I should have waited for my ex because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open, so I ran to the truck stop full speed. I was going to be sick, and I didn't want people to see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck stop looking for me, and he said he would walk me back to the truck so I could get some sleep. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out the windshield at the flashing lights. Then there was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone in the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety in numbers and not to go anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the vehicle. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The image of her face. She had a red rag in her mouth and the 100-mile-per-hour tape around her wrist tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because there were bruises formed on her stomach and her face, and mascara was running down her cheeks. And the smell was like rotted meat and blood. It makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, where I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real. It was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad for the time being having it out of my head. Fast forward and it was February. About 3 months after that incident, we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps. We were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole in the wall, a mom and pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was in walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. I suddenly heard, "Hey there, Purple Pete, what brings you out this way?" The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot, an old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted to. "Maniac, where have you been? Why did you stand us up there?" my ex radioed back. "Oh man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy and I'd rather not get caught," he said with a chuckle. My ex asked him, "What do you mean by getting caught?" He replied, "Don't worry about it. Just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all of these other girls." He then trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal was so high it had to be in the same truck stop. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing in the mic. You know, with all the bad things I've been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with the drugs and the sex like they do. It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. More silence. His voice was even louder this time. You could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop. Only God and the devil himself can judge me for my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity. My ex and I looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in his eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time I was scared, truly terrified. A dust cloud came rolling up in the truck stop, and a dark black menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that disgusting smile at us as he put the mic to his lips. "Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf in Northern Exposure." His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had actually been ridding the world of its sins. I don't know if he was ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6-inch blade on me at all times, just in case I ever ran into the Maniac.